Hello everyone, I'm Ben Contreras, and welcome back to another episode of Ben Talks About. Um, and today I wanted to make this video talking about a the more recently broadcasted Nintendo Direct that they had this February. It did happen quite a while ago, so I'm pretty sure a lot of people have already made discussion videos talking about it. But I decided to just go ahead and put my 2 cents in there. And boy, oh boy, did they announce quite a lot of stuff. Of course, one of the major things they talked about was showcasing the new Zelda game, which is a sequel to Breath of the Wild. But I feel like that's one of the major things that people are talking about in terms of this direct. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip by that there and talk about some of the things that I was more interested in. One of the things that did catch my interest at least a little bit was actually the very first thing that they showed, which was the release date for the fourth game in the Pikmin franchise. Pikmin as a series has always had a sort of cult following. It was one of Nintendo's newer IPs when the GameCube launched, and it has quite the fan base, but nowhere near as big as some of their other franchises. So it's a series that I've been aware of, mostly due to the fact that they've always had the characters from Pikmin in the Smash Bros. Series ever since Brawl came out. But it's never been a series that necessarily piqued my interest, but it does go to, I did find it quite interesting that they started out with what would consider to be one of their main IPs. It's not necessarily a major thing, but it does have, like I said, it does have its fans, and its fans who do play it are very fond of it. So it was really nice that they went ahead and started the direct out with that. Afterwards, they started showcasing a couple more titles that are going to be releasing throughout the year. Quite a lot of indie games, quite a lot of RPG style games as well. One of the things that they actually had announced, I believe, quite a while ago is actually a prequel / origin story for the character Bayonetta from the Bayonetta franchise, which this isn't necessarily me talking about their announcement of it, because they had announced it a while ago, but more so the fact that I'm curious as to the fact that they're making it in the first place, because I personally have not played any of the Bayonetta games, although it has been a series I've been wanting to get into for quite a while now. But I feel like from any sort of discussions or reviews of any of the games in the Bayonetta franchise, the major thing that people usually talk about is how the story in the series is definitely the franchise's lesser aspect of it. No, most people don't really tend to play the games for the story, so I'm quite surprised that they're trying to add more to the lore of the Bayonetta franchise with this title. It does indeed look interesting in terms of the gameplay of it, and I do really like the storybook style art direction they give to it. So it did definitely pique my interest somewhat. Afterwards, the next major announcement that he did, which I believe it was a while since I've seen it, so I might be doing things a little bit out of order, but they did some more announcements for the third Splatoon game, which has been out which has have gotten people's attention, because Splatoon has been one of their, I believe, their newest major IP that they've made since its first came on the Wii U. So the fact that they're giving that series some love is good to know. I personally am not necessarily interested in playing any of them, mostly due to the fact that the major aspect of the game that they usually advertise towards is the online multiplayer stuff. And of course, with the Nintendo Switch, they have it so that you have to pay a subscription service in order to use the online, and I personally just don't agree with subscription services in order for stuff like online and all that. But yeah, another sort of major IP that they went ahead and announced for. The next major thing that I would like to talk about is the expansion pass for the more recently released Fire Emblem Engage, which essentially is a expanded version of the game that adds new side chapters that allow you to unlock the spirits of more of the characters from the Fire Emblem franchise, and that is definitely something that I really do respect, because Engage, when it was first announced, I feel like is a sort of answer to a lot of Fire Emblem fans like desire for a sort of like anniversary style of game, because especially with the previous installments before Three Houses came out on the Switch, a lot of times they felt like, especially with their spin-off, it feels like they sort of catered more towards the fans of Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Fates, which, to be fair, it did that those two games did sort of save the franchise, especially with Awakening in Western markets, because for a while the majority of Fire Emblem fan base was more so exclusively Japanese, because the majority of the titles didn't make it into the US until the Game Boy Advance title. So I feel like a lot of people have been yearning for a sort of game that encompasses all the different aspects and characters from throughout the franchise, rather than just from the previous few games, and I feel like N-Gage was their sort of answer to that, and I feel like that is definitely to the game's benefit, because the game itself is a very solid title, and the fact that they're giving a lot of these characters who a lot of times have never even been mentioned or acknowledged before in the past by the team, aside from in Fire Emblem Heroes, but that's an entirely different beast right there. The fact that the main series of console games is giving these legacy characters that sort of respect is something that I personally do respect, and the fact that we're getting more, it does make a lot of sense, because there's still quite a lot of legacy sort of characters that weren't added to the game that seemed like they could have been. So that was really cool for them to do. Now we're getting more into the stuff that I am more and more interested in. One of the things was the second, or not necessarily second, but the next wave in terms of the track passes for for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Previously, we've had they've added 4 tracks for each individual pass that they have released, which have all been really good. This time they actually did something different and actually gave us not only a new track, but also a new character. And the new character was actually the character Birdo from first debuting in Super Mario Bros. 2, but mostly people know them for being in Mario Kart Double Dash on the GameCube, which is quite surprising, because I feel like a lot of people, whenever I've seen reactions to that announcement, the fact that they're adding Birdo into the game who wasn't in the game, I feel like a majority of people's reactions were, oh yeah, she wasn't in the original Mario Kart 8, was she? This seems like something that they sort of were, because I think that's because Birdo was a character that has been with the series since Double Dash, and she's been in every other game since then. I feel like they sort of expected a lot of characters to stay and not necessarily be removed, so the fact that Birdo sort of went over the shadow when Mario Kart 8 originally released, and with 8 Deluxe as well. It's kind of funny that a lot of people have the same reaction, realizing that she wasn't in the other games in the series. The new track was also, I believe, not necessarily a track that was in any of the previous titles, but was instead a homage to Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo, which was actually a very interesting choice for them to do, and I feel like they captured the art style of that game very well, because that game does indeed have a sort of cult following, but strangely enough, that was the only things they announced for this part of the booster pack that they've done. I'm quite concerned as to if that's all we're going to get for this specific one, because I believe they only have, I'm not quite sure how many more they're going to be announcing, but hopefully this doesn't necessarily become a trend where they're going to be adding lesser and less tracks to each individual pass. Hopefully this is just a one-time sort of thing, or at the very least they're going to announce more of them for this particular season pass in the future, but I suppose only time will tell. Afterwards, we also got some announcements for the retro games that we're going to be seeing for the Nintendo Switch Online service, which, as you've already heard me talk about a few minutes ago, I'm not necessarily agreeing with the idea of paying for stuff like online and all that. they actually announced that we're actually going to be getting some Game Boy and Game Boy Advance titles now being able to be played digitally on the Nintendo Switch, which was actually which was pretty interesting actually. That's one of the final things that they have not done yet, with the exception of stuff like the GameCube. But we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. But yeah, they're going to be including several Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance titles, which was pretty interesting to hear, because I feel like they've been sort of negated. Sort of. I also believe that a lot of the titles they're putting on the subscription service were actually titles that were also available on the 3DS Virtual Console. But since that's starting to that's going to eventually be closed down in March of this year, I believe. I feel like a lot of the things that they're trying to do is trying to get as many of the titles that were on the Virtual Console on the 3DS as part of this online service, which makes me rather interested due to the fact that they actually did not announce any of the Pokemon titles from the Game Boy or Game Boy Advance as being announced on here, with the exception of the Pokemon trading card game title that was on the Game Boy Color. I feel like those are more than likely going to be something that they add later on, probably when Pokemon has their own direct later on in the year. They're probably going to add them there, because I feel like the Game Boy Advance titles have been the ones that have gotten the least amount of attention. The last time they really got attention was when they released Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire on the 3DS, which were remakes of Ruby Sapphire Emerald. But hopefully they do have it so that the original Game Boy Advance games are on there, as well as Fire Red Leaf Green, because in my opinion Fire Red Leaf Green are the best ways to play the first generation of Pokemon. So hopefully those games do get announced later on in the future, because I feel like, especially considering the fact that especially nowadays, you go online to look for the original vintage Pokemon games for the Game Boy Advance, and even on the DS now, they're usually being like skyrocketed in prices from probably over $100 for a legitimate copy that isn't just a pirated or reproduction copy. I feel like it would make it easier for us to be able to experience those games, because there's a lot of merit to the original Game Boy Advance titles that I feel like a lot of the remakes weren't able to really replicate very well, and I feel like a lot of people, especially younger people, grew up with the third generation of Pokemon, including myself, so it would be nice to be able to have those experiences again without trying to find an older copy for a decent enough price. So again, hopefully that becomes announced in the future, but only time will tell. The final major thing I want to go ahead and talk about was actually the thing that I was most excited about and most intrigued by, and that is the announcement that they're going to be, well, they technically already released it, a HD remastered version of Metroid Prime for the Nintendo GameCube. This was actually quite surprising, because I remember they announced, when they announced the remake of Metroid 2 Return to Samus on the 3DS, they also made a short announcement that Metroid Prime 4 was also in development, and we actually had not heard anything about it since that initial teaser trailer for it. But now we're coming out with this title, which I think is actually something that I'm really excited for, because in my personal opinion, Metroid Prime is my personal favorite game in the Metroid series. It's a title that I've had quite a bit of experience with. I've actually played through the game quite a number of times, and the fact that we're getting a new version of the game we played on Nintendo Switch is actually very helpful, because it not only allows people who hadn't experienced it originally on the GameCube, they are now able to experience in a new way, and also the fact that they're actually making it and giving you proper camera controls, where they actually use the right analog stick to control the camera, rather than having it so that the game essentially has tank controls where you have to use the left analog stick to turn your character left and right and moving forward. They are, however, going to give you another option that allows you to play with the original GameCube style controls, although I personally would not do that, because while I do enjoy Metroid Prime, I will admit that the controls take a really, really long time to get used to. Especially since especially nowadays, a majority of first-person shooters always use the right analog stick to control the camera. I'm not quite sure how exactly they're going to handle the way you switch beam power-ups in the game. So hopefully they do it so that it doesn't feel all that cumbersome. But yeah, not only are we getting a release of this game on the GameCube, but also another sort of semi-cult classic game that was originally on the GameCube was also getting re-released on the Nintendo Switch, that being the Tales of Symphonia game, which of course, again, was originally released on the GameCube. And that game does indeed have a sort of fan base when it comes to the Tales of franchise. A lot of people consider that one to be one of, if not the best game in the series, which again was also on the GameCube. So if they're doing all these GameCube re-releases, this sort of opens the door as to what else they could re-release on the Nintendo Switch that were originally titles for the GameCube, which is actually very helpful because GameCube games are also getting higher and higher in prices, especially nowadays online. So being able to experience those titles with on the Nintendo Switch would be very amazing as well. Hopefully we would get stuff like the other two Metroid Prime games, stuff like Kirby's Air Ride, which actually has quite the cult following, especially since they all are also coming out with a remake of Kirby's Return to Dreamland, which they made a few announcements about, which is definitely something I'm going to be playing for the channel when it comes out. You know, all these sort of, classic titles that were for the Nintendo GameCube, and nowadays, since the GameCube is now technically considered retro, I guess you could say, it sort of opens the door to other potential HD remasters that they could do, which really does have me excited because there are a lot of GameCube games that really do need to be remastered. In fact, I could probably do an entire video dedicated to what games I'd like to see on there, but yeah, that was pretty much all of the stuff that I wanted to talk about for this Nintendo Direct, and again, most definitely for the first major group of announcements that Nintendo's made this year, they're definitely starting off really, really strong. It is definitely very good to be a Nintendo fan these days, because we have quite a lot of fun stuff to look forward to. Hopefully they sort of keep this trend going with a lot of announcements that people will definitely that will gain a lot of people's attention. Hopefully this isn't a sort of one-and-done sort of thing and a lot of the other directs become sort of lackluster. Hopefully they get to go ahead and keep this trend going of having titles, again, that will keep people interested, especially concerning the Pokemon franchise, because if the year has just started and we just got the 9th generation of Pokemon games in the previous year, hopefully we're going to be getting a lot of major things happening this year for that franchise. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed me giving my group of thoughts on this February's Nintendo Direct. I had a lot of fun talking to you guys all about it, and hopefully this is a very good year for Nintendo for the rest of 2023. Until I see you all next time with anything else I decide to talk about, whether it's relevant or not, I'm Ben Contreras, and bye.